Hello, I'm Tom Parker, and welcome to the CEPS Tech Podcast. This is the fourth episode in a special five-part series on the future of work, brought to you by CEPS, the Centre for European Policy Studies, the largest think tank on EU and global affairs in Brussels. In this series, we're looking at the changing landscape of work and exploring it with the help of experts from industry, academia, and policy. Joining me as co-host today is Laura Nurski, Associate Research Fellow and Head of Programme on the Future of Work at CEPS.
Hi, Tom. It's been a while, but it's great to be back.
It's great to have you back. Well, today we're also joined by two incredible guests who have helped shape how we think about technology, work, and economic progress. First up, we have Daron Acemoglu, Institute Professor at MIT, co-director of MIT's Shaping the Future of Work initiative, and, of course, Nobel laureate in economics.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Laura.
And also with us is Carlota Perez, honorary professor at University College London and the University of Sussex, as well as adjunct professor of technology and socio-economic development at Tech, Estonia.
Great to be here.
Well, welcome everybody. Today's episode is all about how we can steer the current wave of technological change, especially artificial intelligence, towards more inclusive outcomes. We'll explore how past tech revolutions have unfolded and what kind of institutions are needed to guide AI in the public interest, and why the way we manage work inside organizations might just be as important as the technology itself. Carlota, let's begin with you. You've argued that major technological shifts come in waves, or what you call technoeconomic paradigms, each bringing with them new infrastructure, new ways of doing business, and new institutional frameworks. Where do you think we are in this current wave, Carlota, and what does that mean for the way that we think about AI?
Well, those are pretty big questions. Let me try to give a summary. Yes, in fact, not only can we identify 5 technological revolutions in the history of capitalism, but also they follow a regular pattern of propagation that can explain several things. The social shaping possibilities, the moment when it can be done, the increasing inequality since the 1980s, and the current wave of populism. The problem is that the new paradigm is a very difficult thing to adopt. Everyone is a change in common sense for innovating, organizing, and producing. So the process of adaptation is long, it's difficult, and it evolves in 2 very different periods. The first decades are the turbulent installation of the new technologies, times of experimentation, with many winners and many victims. The final decades are the golden ages, when society has learned to shape the technologies for the common good. Such were the Victorian boom, the Belle Epoque, and the post-war golden age, and hopefully soon the sustainable global golden age of the current information revolution. Essentially, it's not a question of shaping artificial intelligence only, however urgent and important that is, of course. We need to shape the whole information revolution. In my view, AI is the third phase of the revolution that began with microprocessors and computers, intensified with the internet since the 1990s, and is now making a third leap with artificial intelligence. Each of those phases has transformed the jobs market, the workplace, and even regions and countries. But we have not yet managed to shape them and put them at the service of the majorities. That is what golden ages are about. They could be seen as socio-institutional revolutions that reshape government, which then reshapes the playing field for technology and the economy. But such major policy changes have usually happened in response to major financial crashes and major social revolts and upheavals, including the rise of charismatic populist leaders left, right, and center. It is not by chance that both Hitler and Franklin Roosevelt rose in the 1930s, or that communist parties grew in Europe at that time. They all responded to the pain experienced by the many at the time. And that's where we are now. In a way, Trump is an example and proof of what could be done to transform government by leaders that had the common good as their goal. I know that sounds strange, but that's what I really think. I have called these moments the turning points because there are times when the leadership of the economy turns from finance to production, and when the state moves from laissez-faire to active shaping through providing a socially beneficial direction for innovation and investment. But these have been the longest installation periods ever, the longest turning point in history, possibly because of having lost the opportunity to rein in finance in after the 2008 financial crash, or because of the rise of China, or because it's the first revolution that mechanizes mental work, or maybe all of that. Whatever the reason, the task ahead is really daunting. The good thing is that history tells us what needs to be done, and it also shows it's possible.
Well, Daron, over to you. How do you see AI fitting into this framework? Is AI different from previous general purpose technologies in how it interacts with the labor market?
Well, I mean, the framework, which Carlota very nicely summarized, is not my framework. So I don't have to fit AI into that. I think there are some aspects of it that I agree with, some aspects of it that I would put differently. So I think the reason why I don't fully use such a framework is because I think the distinction between general purpose technologies and other technologies, though useful, is not so central for what I think is very important. I think all technologies create disruptions, and for most technologies, almost all of them, there is a very important choice about what direction they should be developed, and different directions have different implications. AI is no exception. Perhaps it's more pronounced in the case of AI. I would definitely feel comfortable with that. And I agree with Carlota when she talks about turning points. This is what James Robinson and I called critical junctures. This is when the existing institutional structure is not up to the task of dealing with the current realities. Those could be realities created by trade, by demographic shocks, by war, or by new technologies. And certainly I am in complete agreement with Carlota that we are at a critical juncture. But what James and I emphasized is that critical junctures don't create any kinds of recipes. There isn't a simple way of saying this is how you're going to come out of the critical juncture. It's highly uncertain. Small differences matter. Agency matters. Ideas matter a lot. And that's why I think, while I agree with Carlota, we have ahead a very daunting task. It's one that I think we have no roadmap for. It makes it even harder. History teaches us a lot of lessons, but I don't think there is anything from history that we can take and use in the current juncture. Part of the reason for that is exactly what Carlota hinted at, which is that AI is very different in the way that it's affecting the economy. Previous waves, where the direction of technology was very important, were either in the context of communication technologies or production technologies that affected, lower education workers. In the case of AI, we don't know. My guess is that it's still going to have its biggest burden on lower education workers, so at least in the foreseeable future. But there are certainly possibilities that it's going to be college-educated workers in managerial positions that are going to be affected. The second problem is that we have never encountered in the past companies nearly as powerful as the tech firms that dominate the economy. Whatever worked against Standard Oil or Carnegie Steel, that's not match when it comes to the behemoths of the tech world. The third is, for reasons that are not completely unrelated to technology, but I think have other very important causes as well. Our democracy has never been so impaired. FDR rose up to the challenge, as Carlota was hinting at, and managed to steer a direction very different from the horrible costs that Bolsheviks and fascists imposed. But he was building on some democratic foundations that were, I think, much stronger than what we have right now. So I feel like we are without a map. The only thing that gives me hope is that I believe new ideas can really bring people together. And as a starting point, recognizing that AI is going to have these sweeping effects, and these sweeping effects are under our control, not just forces of nature that were pre-programmed thousands of years ago, nor something that we should necessarily leave to the few people controlling the largest corporations humanity has ever seen. So there is actually a democratic component, I think, is a starting point. But where we go from there is a big question mark.
Yeah, what strikes me in these technological waves is that technology doesn't just change the tools that we use in work, but it changes like the very structure of the labor market, the occupations and the sectors in which we work. And indeed, AI might not be the first wave of automation, but as both of you said, it could be the first one to reach deeply into those non-routine cognitive tasks, reshaping professional and knowledge work. And we also know that not all digital technologies affect work in the same way. For example, in a study of manufacturing firms by Bloom and colleagues, they found that these information technologies like ERP systems tended to decentralize decision making by equipping frontline workers and plant managers with better data, while communication technologies like intranet and email centralized control in their study, shifting decision making upwards to the headquarters. So for AI, the question is there, will it be used to empower workers at different levels of the organization, or will it centralize decision making and tighten control from the top? And that's a design choice, one with big implications for job quality and labor market inclusion.
Yeah, if I could add to that, Laura, I mean, I think absolutely it's a design choice, but I even depart from the very interesting results of Bloom et al. That's in the nature of these technologies. So I think internet was initially viewed as something that would decentralize work, decentralize decision making, and I think it definitely has that capacity. And a lot of my writing recently has been that every dimension of AI offers us different possibilities for both centralization and decentralization. But what we have to recognize is that a lot of decentralization talk coming from Silicon Valley right now is bunkum. Silicon Valley is centralizing information to an extent that we haven't seen before. The only thing also to note, that's the silver lining, is that despite everything else that they're telling you, Silicon Valley and on any of these companies right now don't have the power to actually use that centralized information in a reasonable way. Just look at the mess that they made with content moderation. So at least for a decade, I think, that huge centralization of information is still not completely stultifying for humanity. But once their tools catch up with the amount of data that they do have and they can have, I think we have a real disaster in our hands. So this is going to be something unprecedentedly centralized.
I think one thing that's being discussed really is that technology doesn't develop in a vacuum. It is shaped and steered by the institutions that surround it. And that's from regulation and education to labor markets and social norms. Carlota, you argue that the development phase of a technological revolution requires a new institutional framework to fully realize the benefits of innovation. What kind of institutional rethinking is needed today to make AI deliver on its promises?
Well, first of all, I think we must make clear that it won't be easy to overturn these long decades of neoliberal anti-government ideology, nor the plutocracies that have formed with the behemoths and all these. I mean, we have very powerful actors that have actually decided to take over the state. It is quite a frightening situation. And the fact is that not only do we need to change the state, but we need to rejuvenate the state. We need to make it agile, bold, innovative in policymaking so it can once again set up a win-win game between business and society. The problem too is who is in the state now? Who has been attracted to be a politician? Who has been attracted to be a civil servant? Who has been attracted to be a policymaker in a world where the mantra was government is the problem, government is the issue, government is corrupt, government is everything awful. And we need to turn government into everything good. And that's not going to be easy. Obviously, the current welfare state, what's left of it, was designed for a world of jobs for life. So it's no longer adequate. It needs a complete revamping to support people facing rapid technical change, increasing self-employment, portfolio careers, lifelong education, and so on and so forth. I mean, the whole jobs market has changed completely. And this time, we might also require supranational institutions to get the best out of a set of technologies that is globalizing by nature. Now, the question, would that be possible? I don't know. That's one of my main questions and one of my main worries, because I cannot see these states that have become so weak next to the global financial casino and the global corporations that are all over the place in several states. They're very powerful. We have 3 actors now, and we keep on thinking that it's the national states that define things. So the thing is that to make the required changes, the state has to modernize itself. The pyramids, the silos, and the rules-based anti-change structures of current governments, which were inherited from mass production. That's how companies used to work. So the state copied them, and we always do that. Governments always do copy the best, but they come late. That's one of our problems. So current governments are not ready for the dynamic transformation required. So we need to transform work within government. The state must be as agile as the best companies, with much flatter structures, more connected to the people, constantly innovating and evaluating results, but it also has to make the best of the technological potential. Supposing we were to implement universal basic income, it would have to be an AI-based, fully automatic payment that everybody receives and is returned in taxes by those who don't need it. We need big changes, big projects, electrical appliances, for instance. They are basically made in China and are already moving to lower labor cost countries. So they are imported and sold mostly on credit and scrapped within a few years. If governments were to pass a law making it obligatory for the seller to take back the end-of-life product, so we have a circular economy, while also forbidding putting it in the public rubbish sites, a rental model could be born. It would be with really durable products. There's no reason why they couldn't last several decades, with web-based AI diagnostics and software for 3D printing of spare parts, while also creating millions of maintenance and installation jobs in all countries, working with AI, of course, and the circular economy with the end-of-life recycling would guarantee there are enough materials for every family in the world to have a refrigerator. And it would also be profitable for the companies involved. Little policy changes here and there will not do. We need major and bold institutional changes. And full employment and social peace are very good for business too. Every new generation of capitalists has had to learn that lesson. But these new billionaires are still in the business of tax evasion and tax avoidance, ignoring the society that made their wealth possible.
Daron, Carlota mentioned they need major and bold institutional changes. You've also already touched on it, but suggesting that AI development is moving towards the extractive, perhaps inequality enhancing. What would a more inclusive institutional environment look like? And how would we get there from your point of view?
Well, I mean, I think one difference between my sort of analysis and Carlota's is useful. I think, broadly speaking, we share a very similar analysis of the current situation. But I think Carlota is much more optimistic that big institutional changes can resolve the problems, whereas I am very suspicious of big institutional changes as well. So I 100% agree with Carlota, and I think we should emphasize this more. We are at a very dangerous place where a handful of companies controlled by a few people have become unmanageably large, are increasing their soft and hard power, and trying to control various levers of power throughout the world. The only thing worse than this, in my opinion, is if a politician, unscrupulous enough to be able to do that, actually controls these companies. So we shouldn't emphasize Trump too much. But I think the only thing worse than a few companies that are so powerful is that those companies become beholden to President Trump in the United States, for example, in the same way that oligarchs became beholden to Putin. Much worse than the oligarchy that had emerged after the fall of Yeltsin or during Yeltsin. So big institutional changes, I think, have big risks at a point like this. So I really believe that whatever we do has to be gradual and bottom up. And that's the reason why I think we really have no roadmap here. So my hopes are on developing new ideas, Because if we develop new aspirations in a democracy, however impaired that democracy may be, it might still have an effect. And changing incentives, both for the large tech companies, but also for competitors. I think one of the things that has happened, and you can blame that on neoliberalism or something else, many causes, is that the US and to some degree Europe have stopped antitrust. And I think the current situation would not be as hopeless if we had more diverse tech companies that felt empowered enough to hold their own in terms of their technology choices and directional choices against the big companies. That's not the situation right now. It might start actually changing. There are some moves in that direction. So a more competitive environment, more incentives for what I have called pro-worker AI, meaning AI that actually creates new capabilities, new tasks, new information sources for workers. I think we have to start small in many of these things. And I think it's not actually a disadvantage to start small, because I think there isn't that much appetite anywhere in the world for really big institutional changes. And I think when, for example, some politicians such as the Biden administration in the United States or parts of the Biden administration incorrectly read the mandate that they got in 2020 as an invitation to do large-scale institutional changes, they both made a mess, and they brought Trump back for a second term. So I think we should be careful in how much we wish these disruptive big institutional changes that are imposed from top down, because they might actually take us somewhere even more dangerous than where we are.
Well, I'm touching on that, Daron. We've obviously talked a lot about technology institutions. We're talking about the makeup of those institutions, this top-down, as you said, changes that could happen. But there is this layer in between, how organizations themselves are structured all the way through. Laura, I know you wanted to come in and discuss this more in detail, so the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Tom. Well, one of the things that I find fascinating is that in each of these technological revolutions, it doesn't just lead to new products or services or what we call new business models, but it also tends to usher in new dominant management paradigms or organizational models. There's this paper by Bodrojic and Adler that show how each technological wave in the past has led first to scientific management and Taylorism and then human relations, then the multi-divisional firm or the matrix firm, then lean production, and nowadays, these agile scrum ways of working in software development. And like in Carlota's framework, they show that each revolutionary cycle comes with some organizational dysfunctions, like the alienation under Taylorism, and is then rectified in a balancing cycle, for example, the personnel counseling of the human relations movement. And these management models, they shape how work is organized, how decisions are made, and ultimately how inclusive or extractive workplaces become. And to me, AI raises the same question. Do we want it to empower workers or control them? And we already see some worrying trends like algorithmic management and the platformization of work, which tend to fragment tasks and reduce autonomy.
Yeah, absolutely. It should all be about empowering the workforce. So essentially allowing AI to level everyone up, create new skills, allow people to do better at their jobs by minimizing the amount they do. This is what we talked about a lot in the previous episode.
Yeah, these more hopeful visions exist as well. In the previous episode with David Otter, he argued that AI could democratize expertise and make those middle skill jobs more productive. But other people like Molly Kinder at the Brookings Institute, for example, they worry that AI is going to automate those entry level jobs and it's going to break the junior to senior career path. So my question that I have is like, if the state has this role in steering technology and innovation, should it also steer management models and the way that organizations are run?
I mean, absolutely. In an ideal world, 100%, management models have huge effects. And, I have argued in the past that, for example, we cannot understand some or all of the changes in the wages that have happened without also recognizing that a very different set of priorities set in among top managers, often propagated by business schools and management consultancy, sort of prioritizing shareholder values instead of, more of a sharing or welfare capitalism type of model. Absolutely. But both when it comes to organizations and technologies, we also have to recognize that the ability of the state to steer anything is always limited. So, again, I find myself always in a difficult position because there are two big poles that people are attracted to, and I find both of these poles are wrong. I mean, not just partially wrong, completely wrong, but the middle is just a restricted place. One pole, which many economists and many market advocates say that you cannot control innovation. Innovation is so bottom up, so complex that there is no control. I mean, that is wrong. Innovation, just like every human activity, responds to incentives, responds to institutions. There even marginal or at the edge interventions could have avalanche effects, but they are very hard to predict. At the other pole is like the sort of the optimistic view that the state somehow has a magic wand to steer technology or organizations in whatever direction it wants. That's completely wrong too. So we have to be in this middle where we recognize technology has many directions, each with very different implications. And human aspirations, ideas, institutions, and policies have effects, but they are very, very complex and very difficult to predict. That's why I said earlier on, I am very much in favor of gradualism, because it's only with gradualism that we can understand what each intervention in a given context of the technologies, institutions, ideas, and conflicts that we have is affecting technology, and then we can try to adjust. But the current bureaucratized decision making makes that impossible. For example, European Union, very much with the right aspirations, passed the GDPR, data control, data privacy. Those are huge issues. Applause. But then you realize GDPR is a complete mess. It's not doing anything good. But what you should be doing then, you should be revising it. We know now why GDPR doesn't work. We can revise it, but it's impossible in the current bureaucratized, weak democratic environment. So the top-down things are going to be just like GDPR. So that is the thing that we have to really try to sort of navigate.
Carlota, Daron just said there, the current bureaucracy makes it impossible, but have you got examples of how the state has shaped, I suppose, the way that organizational models have been put in previous deployment periods?
Well, definitely. And what has happened, even in the first revolution, when Pitt transformed the state completely modern. I mean, he read Adam Smith, he was a graduate of Cambridge, and he actually transformed the state into a very modern, Smith-like sort of organization with enormous success. And part of the reason why they won the war against Napoleon is because of what he did from the state. Even things like shipbuilding, which the state used to do a lot of, he managed to get private sector to come and do with very modern contracts and with completely, they even changed the way that the parts for ships were located. So there were major changes in organization, major changes in the contracts, major changes in the conditions they imposed upon. And all that was done from the state by people who were very young. He was 21 or 22 when he became prime minister. So that's one. Then the other thing, when we came to the next revolution, we have Peel and the whole Liberal Party changing the whole aristocratic corruption system and trying to turn the government into truly technical, competent, including having exams, etc. When we come to, well, whoever we want, if we look at the Belle Epoque, except for the British, who actually made a mess, and I'm afraid might be the comparison with the US now, it's really terrible because they just went off into the empire. They became the tools for the financial world, for the whole financial world, and they forgot industry, and nobody funded industry in England, and the US and Germany just came, just forged ahead. So it has happened each time, but the clearest case was the FDR in the US and the Marshall Plan, and how the whole of Europe, the welfare state became really important. And therefore, with the welfare state, what do we have? We had suburbanization, home ownership, and therefore demand, dynamic demand for industry. So industry knew what to produce and how to produce it, and people had enough salary, enough income to be able to buy the things that industry was producing and to take credit, which banks learned to give credit. So people were able to get mortgages for houses, to buy appliances on credit. And because they had pensions, they could spend all their income. But at the same time, there was the Cold War. So that again shaped a whole set of innovations that ended up in the information revolution later. So business had dynamic demand organized by a lot of conditions that the state put, and they accepted that salaries had to increase. Unions were strengthened so that They would fight for all the conditions that would make workers consumers. So in fact, how the state did it was very important. Now, what could the state do now? What type of state? How do you get an FDR to have the power and the correct and the special people around him? Because he brought really competent people to design each of the aspects. So the problem now, I insist, is that government has become so mediocre because, and I'm sorry about the people who are there because many of them are completely frustrated. But the thing is that governments now are completely incapable. Their structure is the same as before, which is completely old, completely bureaucratic, completely rules-based. People cannot innovate. They cannot communicate with people they serve. They're frustrated in all sorts of ways. So there is this lack of hope even among the people who are in government. So I do understand that somebody would not believe that governments can change. But from the government where the business of government is business in the 1920s, when government actually was supposed not to act and actually take away taxes so that business could do whatever it wanted, to the Keynesian super welfare state, even more welfare state in Europe that we had after the war, I would say that miracles do happen. And therefore, I expect the miracle now. And if we don't have the miracle, we're in hell. We don't really have an option because there is no way that business is going to make the changes. They are not interested in making the changes. No matter how much intelligent ideas are brought to them, they will not do it. But the current governments cannot do it. So that's our problem.
Well, it's a very big point and a big problem there, Carlota, and we've touched clearly on quite a lot today, from technological paradigms and institutions to the hidden levers of organizational design. But to wrap it up, I'd like to ask each of you if you could implement one concrete policy change in the next 12 months, maybe if we did have the right institutional and governmental setup to steer this technological revolution in a more inclusive direction, what would it be?
It's an excellent question. Unfortunately, I don't have an excellent answer. Given my view that we really need gradual, multi-pronged approaches, I don't think there is a single policy lever. But let me suggest two that are not discussed enough that I think would be helpful. And one of them actually was feasible under Biden and wasn't done. And I think it would be feasible again, which is to create a new federal AI agency in the United States. And I think Europe should do the same at the European level, hiring best talent with ideas and aspirations, exactly what Carlota was emphasizing is needed, and give them a broad mandate, both to disseminate information within the government and within the different agencies and within the private sector, but also enough resources to support experimental projects, competitions, and so on for a more pro-worker, pro-democracy direction of AI. There is no roadmap that you can say, this is definitely what they should do, and etc. But I think some agency like that would really energize the public sector's approach to AI and its potential role. Second, I think one idea which I proposed in the past and hasn't, and other people have also proposed related ideas, but has never been part of the policy discussion anywhere, is actually create data markets that vest property rights in individuals and then allows them to form collectives or unions for data that both would be relevant for a fair distribution of the gains from data, but more importantly, it would create the infrastructure for companies that want to do more pro-worker AI, because most pro-worker AI would need to be domain-specific, would need to embed in AI models high-level expertise that you cannot get from a free-for-all, no property rights data market. So this would encourage people who want to create data, for example, how to train electricians to do more sophisticated tasks. And it would also take some of the least sort of resistance path ahead of big, huge foundation models and other large data collection based models of the tech sector. So I think at one fell swoop, a data infrastructure that's modern enough would create a variety of influences on the future of the technology that would go in the right direction.
Carlota, if you could implement one concrete policy change in the next 12 months, I know Daron's just had two, but if you could do one to steer this technological revolution in a more inclusive direction, what would it be?
Well, I don't know if it can be done in 12 months, but however difficult it may sound, my choice would be a global financial transactions tax to fund the greening of the global south. A mere 1% on every international transfer above, say, 20,000 would raise trillions. I see it as the only way to avoid the two biggest threats to humanity: irreversible global warming and war between China and the West. Green technologies are not a revolution. They are not initially more productive nor more profitable. They will only become the investment of choice if there is public funding and public policy in their favor. As to the West and China, they are competing for the same markets. So that's why the tension is so big. But investment in the South would create dynamic demand for both camps and can release the tensions and increase employment in both the North and the South. Besides, if the green transition in the global South does not happen, it will affect everybody. If global warming is not stopped, the North will face a tsunami of migrations. It is not repression that stops desperate migrations, but improving conditions in the countries of origin. And this time, not only economic conditions, but also the climatic ones. If you have 52 degrees, you run. And you run to any place that's cooler. And guess where the cooler places are? In the north. So it's pretty serious. I mean, I don't know if some of the people who are against bothering with climate change realize that particular problem. But getting this fund to fund the South would be a win-win game between North and South and between humanity and the planet. But I wish it could be done in 12 months. We don't have much time, and climate change is irreversible.
So, Tom, when it comes to my policy recommendations, I want to follow up on that point that both of them made about the importance of gradual change and experimentation. And I think the area for me that is in most need of that approach is exactly job design and organization design. We talk a lot about skills shortages and how we can teach people new skills or reskill and upskill them, but we don't talk enough about how jobs themselves can be redesigned to make better use of skills or support continuous learning or prevent burnout and disengagement. And policy makers could support this experimentation, right? So both of them agreed that direct influence of policy or the state in organizational models might be a step too far. But as Daron said, we need to find that middle ground. And middle ground could be to support that experimentation by funding pilots and providing guidance and creating spaces for firms to try out more inclusive ways of organizing work and sharing best practices. And that means encouraging models that empower workers and integrate AI as a tool for collaboration and open up opportunities for personal growth. So that's where I would focus policy efforts in the next 12 months.
Yes, there's much more we could talk about, but let's finish with our cross-episode game of tag.
Yeah, indeed, Tom. In our previous episode, we received some questions from our guests to hand over to the next guest. So, Daron, David Alter asked you why you are so much more pessimistic about AI than about other technologies.
Oh, that's a great question. I don't think I'm pessimistic. I think I'm realistic. I think the promises that are being made for AI are just extremely inflated. No technology is capable of doing what the proponents of AI claim it will do, and as quickly. Any productive technology spreads slowly. It requires institutional adjustments, like Carlota emphasized, organizational adjustments, complementary skills to be developed. And the capabilities of AI, when compared to the human cognition, judgment, creativity, are still not there. So I don't think AI is going to spread very rapidly. But I am, my research, even under a variety of assumptions I've made, always points out that there are productivity gains from AI. So I'm not denying those. I just think they are not going to be as large and as quick as its proponents claim, nor is it going to be as easy to turn AI into something that democratizes work or creates new tasks and new capabilities for workers. So I think pro-worker AI, which I have argued for almost a decade, is feasible, is not easy. It's not something that's going to happen up automatically. So I'm pessimistic relative to some people on both fronts about how fast AI is going to go, and also how difficult it will be to turn AI in a more beneficial direction.
Actually, I wanted to add to what Daron said now about the hype in AI. Much of it is because finance finally found another thing with which to make billions. So they are really hyping it even more because finance had found itself like there was nothing more. There are no more billionaires to be made in 2 weeks. There is no more, so suddenly they caught on this thing and we are in danger of falling in their trap. So I agree with Darren. Really, we have to look at AI taking away the hype that has put on it by finance.
And then one other thing, if I could add, but there is also a sense, just this conversation with Carlota, there's also a sense in which hype is really dangerous because the hype is cementing the current direction. The more hyped up we make AI, the more money flows to exactly what they're doing, and it makes it even harder to steer it. So when I rail against the hype, it's not just being a contrarian. It's because I think the hype is really socially damaging.
Well, that brings us to the end of today's episode. Many thanks to our guests, Daron Acemoglu.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Laura. This was really wonderful. It was great talking to you, Carlota. Thanks for having me on the program. Have a good day.
And Carlota Perez.
Thanks to you too. Yes, it was great to share.
And finally, thanks to my wonderful co-host, Laura.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Carlota and Daron, and bye, everyone, and thank you for listening.
Well, that was another fascinating discussion. We're 4 episodes in. I can't wait for the 5th. But before we go, Laura, any last reflections on this cracking 4th episode?
What struck me the most today is that if we care about inclusive growth, we need to think not only about innovation and, of course, the institutions that shape it, but also about how work is actually structured inside of firms. And as Daron reminded us, this change doesn't have to happen all at once. It can start with experimentation, testing new ways of organizing work, supporting more inclusive organizational models, and learning from each other about what works. And I do believe that the state has a role to play in this by enabling that experimentation and helping good practices to scale. And because in the end, organizational models, they aren't just technical or internal matters. They shape who gets to learn, who gets to decide, and who gets to grow. And in that sense, they're political and they're a public concern.
Yeah, absolutely. A powerful note to end on there, Laura. Thanks again to Laura for being a wonderful co-host, and thanks to everyone for listening. Stay tuned for the final episode in this series.